Good morning, everyone, to the members of the panel, especially to my thesis advisor, Dr. Elgin S. Pagirigan, and to the Dean of the Wesleyan University-Philippines Graduate School, Dr. Henry S. Subia. Good morning. Before anything else, let me start this undertaking through a short devotion, which is from Colossians chapter 3, verses 23 to 24. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Vision. By 2024, Wesleyan University-Philippines is a Methodist institution of learning that fosters academic excellence, transformative research, servant leadership, environmental stewardship, and globally competitive healthcare services imbued with social holiness. Mission. Wesleyan University-Philippines provides quality education and compassionate healthcare services imbued with Wesleyan spirituality to produce competent graduates committed to the healing of persons and the whole of creation for the glory of God. So I'm going to start now for my pre-oral defense. My thesis is entitled Pattern Interrupt, an effective tool in getting students' attention while listening inside the class. It's from me, Veronica, Almera, Manuel, from MAEd-English. Now, this presentation will have 6 parts. First part will be about the rationale, a short introduction on the research. The second, the framework. The third part will be about the statement of the problem. The fourth part will at least refresh to the methodology used in this research. The fifth will be about the results and discussion. And the last part will be about the conclusions and recommendations drawn from this research. The first part, as the rationale, a simple introduction about the problems that push or encourage, motivate the researcher to undergo study in this topic. It's about the problems that the teacher is experiencing inside the classroom. Getting student attention is one great responsibility in classroom setting, especially when the students are used in the activities inside the class. And this time of the class, they tend to be bored, loud, disruptive, and noisy. And that time, the teacher is thinking of the ways how can he address this problem. And this problem is managing behavioral problems. Behavioral problems can be also sensory processing disorders, aggressiveness, inattentiveness, or inappropriateness in language. Now, according to the study which is conducted in 2018, the Powtoon.com, in their article by Matzel, 2019, it says there that there are about 40% of the teachers who could not make it even in the first 5 years. It's because of the strains, the stress that they are experiencing inside the classroom, and thinking of the ways how to manage these behavioral problems showed by their students. And that time, we can correlate it to the attention span of the students. The attention span, average attention span of a human is about 10 to 15 minutes. And this has been the consensus all through these years. Actually, some of the Western countries coincide with this consensus, which their lectures and discussions have been reduced to 15 minutes only. And also TED-Ed, it's popular in YouTube and Facebook. They are indirectly using this consensus which their talks with only a maximum of 18 minutes every discussion. But later on, in one literature cited by Briggs in 2014, psychologists Karen Wilson and James Korn concluded that there was a little evidence to support the claim, and another study was conducted. The researcher used clickers to report the attention lapses of the students, and the researcher also asked the teacher to use 3 different teaching methods, which were lecturing, demonstrating, and asking questions. And there they found out that the most frequently reported lapses in students' attention was only 1 minute or less. The problems in managing students' behavior, the very short attention span of the students, and the ways of how to engage the students in class are some of the problems which the researcher had experienced personally. And the stressful days, the wasted hours of talks and discussions are also added to the frustrations of the researcher as a teacher, and that she thought of something which could really help her and search and sought for the answer. And right now, this attention span problem has been given a way to be solved, and that is through pattern interrupt. Pattern interrupt is breaking someone's attention or behavior by interrupting through an unexpected stimulus. These stimuli can be jokes, sounds, claps, or pictures which can help attract their attention. It was named by hypnotherapist Milton Erickson, and this can also be used as the tool of the teachers to engage their students in class. Therefore, this research is proposed to evaluate the effectiveness of pattern interrupt in getting students' attention, and so to add more knowledge of how this tool can be used inside the classroom to enhance their listening skills. As for the second part of this presentation, we'll be moving on to the framework of the study. This study is anchored with the theories of selective attention of Broadbent and Treisman. Broadbent has his Broadbent's filter theory, and Treisman has her attenuation theory. Broadbent's theory used an experiment of a split-span attention experiment, which is also called the dichotic listening test. From there, Broadbent used 2 messages to convey to the person with his left and right ear. It showed there that the person was able to convey the message correctly or properly with the message he attended more. And from there, Broadbent concluded that people selects the sensory inputs or information from its brain through its filter, and right there decided which is important and not important. This theory of Broadbent is supported by Treisman. She said that yes, humans have filter to decide the important and unimportant sensory inputs, but for Broadbent, he said that the inputs which are not being attended are rejected by the brain. But for Treisman, she argued that these rejected sensory inputs were just stayed in the sensory buffer, and right there, it was just the person is just attenuating the sensory input, meaning the person is giving less attention, or the degree of intensity of attention is decreased. For the conceptual framework of the study, the researcher used a paradigm. This paradigm showed the dependent and independent variable, where performance of the students is the dependent and independent variable is the pattern interrupt. Now, we can see here how pattern interrupt can affect the dependent variable. And also, this paradigm served as the guide of the researcher to complete this study. There are two groups used, the control and experimental. There are also two measurements used, the pre-test and post-test. Both groups undergone these tests, but only one group received the treatment, which is the pattern interrupt. From there, this illustrates that the independent variable, the pattern interrupt, if utilized properly, has a positive result to develop responsive students' attention and improve listening skills. Moving on to the next part of this presentation is the statement of the problem. There are 7 questions to be answered in this research, and here they are. SOP1, how may the performance of the control group be described in terms of their pretest scores? SOP2, how may the performance of the experimental group be described in their pretest scores? So, this actually supported the paradigm, which is the first step to start this research, is through administering a pretest, both for the experimental and control group. SOP3, is there a significant difference in the pretest scores of the experimental and control groups? Now, in this SOP3, we'll be comparing the mean scores of both groups. SOP4, how may the performance of the control group be described in terms of their post-test scores? Now, from here, SOP5, how may the performance of the experimental group be described in terms of their post-test scores? SOP4 and 5 will be discussing about the performance of experimental and control group in post-test. Meaning, in this part, the intervention has been used or utilized. For SOP6, is there a significant difference in the post-test scores of the students and experimental and control groups? So here, we'll be comparing the scores of both groups and see what is the difference among them. Now, for the last SOP, how may the experiences of the experimental group be described after the utilization of pattern interrupt? In this SOP, this will be solely for experimental group, describing their experiences, how they approve pattern interrupts that were used to them. For the fourth part of this presentation, let's discuss the methodology. The method used here is quantitative in nature and employ the quasi-experimental design of research. This gives the opportunity for the researcher to manipulate the independent variable, how this independent variable affect the dependent variable. And also, to gather data, this research used pre-test and post-tests to describe the performance, the skills of the students, and survey questionnaires to describe their experiences. Moving on to the fifth part of this presentation is the results and discussion. And to answer the first SOP, how may the performance of the control group be described in terms of their pretest scores, is in table number 1. This table number 1, we can see that the control group got a mean score of 2.78, and the findings reveal that most of the respondents fell under the developing stage. 21 out of 55 respondents, which is equal to 38.18% of the respondents, fell under developing, ranging scores from 3 to 4. And pretest is administered to identify the readiness of the students. And so, according to Kim and Wilson in 2010, pretest can be also used to create baseline data for intervention and treatment. And from these results, the researcher or the teacher can plan the instruction ahead and maybe the strategies or techniques he can use to improve these scores. From the results above, the mean does not fall in the score with the highest frequency, which is in the beginning level with 24 students and is equal to 43.64%. Because the distribution of data is scattered. Only the advanced level had no numbers, and this pretest as a starting point for this research gives meaningful reference for the development of this study. Answering SOP 2, how may the performance of the experimental group be described in terms of their pretest scores is in table number 2. As we can see here, the experimental group obtained a mean score of 3.04, and results show the average performance of the respondents is at the developing level. 36.36% out of 55 respondents acquired 0 to 2 scores. It's the highest frequency. However, the 18, 32.73%, and 14, 25.45% of the developing and approaching proficiency, if compared, are greater. Still, the mean marked at the developing stage. In 2010, Fancher assumed that pretest is administered to identify the differences between groups. This research used two groups, but they are still independent in each other, and we can see the differences even though they have similar in number. Now, in experimental researches, this assumption was valid. Later on, Fancher argued with her own words that there are other ways to show differences between baseline and endline data. But for this research, it may not be a question since this only used a quasi-experimental design, which, as Price and others in 2015 described, quasi-experimental researches just look like an experiment but not a full-blown experiment. And as for this result, experimental group, as its name suggests, is selected to receive the intervention, which is pattern interrupt, for 2 weeks and is tested again after. SOP number 3, is there a significant difference in the pretest scores of the experimental and control groups? Now, from these findings, there is no significant difference is recorded. It's just that this confirms the hypothesis of no significant difference. So usually in pretests, the performance of control and experimental groups are equal. However, testing the difference between these two independent groups is one approach to conclude right assumptions on the performance of the respondents. Having no statistical difference in the pretest doesn't mean a failure. It's just illustrating that both groups are needed to improve more in their skills with the aid of an intervention. But only in this research, only the experimental group received the treatment. For SOP number 4, how may the performance of the control group be described in terms of their post-test scores? So in this table, we can see that the mean score is recorded as 3.33. This indicates that the performance of the control group is still at the developing level. On the other hand, an increase in the mean is noted. Results as compared to the pretest performance from 0% in the advanced remark now becomes 3.64%, and a 12.73% at approaching proficiency remark turns into 23.64% in the post-test respectively. So the increase in mean score may also show an improvement of performance, though the mark is in the developing level. For SOP number 5, how may the performance of the experimental group be described in terms of their post-test scores? In this table, we can see that the experimental group attained a mean score of 3.66, This denotes that the experimental group stayed at the developing level but has improved in the mean score, likened to 3.04 in pre-tests. Similarly, 9 respondents reached proficient mark at 16.36%, contrasted to 3.64% in the pre-tests, and 2 more respondents become advanced based from the results of the post-examination, comparing to only from 1 respondent in the advanced mark now becomes 3. So a change in mean score can indicate improvement among them and can be considerably effective in different way. Comparing the pre-test mean score to the post-test, when score of the students may illustrate positive results, especially in students' experiences inside the class during the implementation of pattern interrupt. For the last SOP, which is how may the experiences of the experimental group be described after the utilization of pattern interrupt. In this SOP, there will be 3 parts because it explains the 3 phases of the lesson, and the pattern interrupts used are rated according to their levels. These are extremely appropriate at a scale of 5, appropriate at a scale of 4, neither appropriate or not appropriate at a scale of 3, not appropriate at a scale of 2, and extremely not appropriate at a scale of 1. These scales are used to assess the students' experiences in the 3 phases of the lesson, just like what I'm saying: the before the lesson, during the lesson, and after the lesson. In this study, the researcher utilized a teaching tool in improving listening skills of the students. In any lesson, teachers prepare the students for the lesson. And this phase of the lesson motivated the students and helped them engage in the classroom activities to be done. At this juncture, the experiences of the students will be described and the level of appropriateness of pattern interrupts used in everyday classroom situation. The first phase of the lesson is before the lesson. There are 5 items listed under it, which were pertaining to the experiences of the students during this phase of the lesson. Students scored an overall weighted mean of 4.82, which is equal to extremely appropriate, and students has really had consensus on describing their experiences through the pattern interrupts used. Automatically, when they heard clops, they would come inside or be seated. When they heard turn to ice, they would stand, and when they heard make a wave, they're going to move their hands as a signal for readiness. Item 1.1.1, my teacher claps her hands 2 times to signal my classmates and I to come in, gained a weighted average of 4.82, which describe as a sense of patience while waiting outside before they were asked to come, by listening patiently to the claps that would instruct them to come in. Prayer leaders seem to be the second favorite because it sees the second to the highest weighted mean, which is 4.76. They probably like volunteering themselves to lead a prayer and stand in front of their classmates, and hearing 3 claps was their most anticipated sound in this part of the lesson because it gained 4.91 weighted mean, which would ask them to be seated. Experiential learning, game environments, positive emotions, and cooperative learning methods are just some of the ways to motivate students inside the class. In students' point of view, using pattern interrupts at the start of the class was fun and exciting. This also set the mood for discipline and motivation to learn. Moreover, pattern interrupts in this phase of the lesson were able to achieve their goal in stimulating learners' attention and interest, and students highly ratified the appropriateness of pattern interrupts as they describe their experiences of the said teaching tool. The second part of the lesson is during the lesson. And in this phase, it is the middle part. This is where the students acquire knowledge by listening to the teacher or recorded audios and other sounds. Pattern interrupts used during this phase were composed of the teacher's inflection of her voice or tone, whistling, clapping, and the repeated phrases turn to eyes and make a wave. During the lesson period yielded an overall weighted mean of 4.62, which is a bit lower than the before the lesson phase, yet maintained an extremely appropriate total response. Checking students' readiness was a good gesture. They affirmed that it was appropriate to be asked if they were ready through the phrase "make a wave." This is where a short time of hands and shoulders stretching. It was pleasurable act for them. And moreover, turn to eyes had an impact to keep them quiet and stay focused on the lesson. Interestingly, according to Bunse and others in 2010, they found out that the reported students' lapses, short lapses in attention, which is 1 minute or less, have significantly more often than the medium, which is 2 to 3 minutes, and long, which is 5 minutes or more lapses. These figures only showed that the students are trying to re-engage and pay attention to the class when they realize that their minds had wandered. They also added that teachers could help students through the use of student-centered activities, which have high chances of increasing this attention span. And so, for Zhang, Reeve, and Desi in 2010, as they cited the studies of Skinner and Belmont in 1993, Tucker and others in 2002, supporting students' autonomous and providing clear expectations while framing their learning activities could lead to the high engagement in tasks and better behavior management, and so a peaceful classroom situation. And for Moore and Theater in 2013, they conclude that reviewing peer processes have dual benefits. And these benefits are, first, positioning feedback as an effective learning tool for the completion of students' assessment, and second, as a development of more diverse skills that could help them in the future. So these statements, these studies, which have been proven that keeping attention and engagement in class could really help them to enhance their skills. And we could achieve that through the use of pattern interrupts, as it clearly manifested that the students really approved and affirmed that using pattern interrupts could keep and maintain their engagement and attention. The last phase of the lesson is after the lesson. In this part, the students present their individual or group outputs. The assessments are also being done in this part, which lets the students to express themselves, relate personal experiences, share thoughts about the lesson, and perform certain activities that could boost their confidence. Before presenting outputs, students greatly approve all on board, aye aye, Captain. It made them more excited to perform or present their works, at the same time releasing nervousness as they respond loudly. Turn to eyes was really one of their most anticipated phrases, tied with ready to rock, ready to go, when the class ended. They got thrilled to hear this question because it was already time to go when that happened. Clearly, maintaining students' engagement until the end of the lesson is one great achievement in teaching. As a teacher, their attention is what matters the most inside the classroom. Motivating them, checking on their progress, and keeping their attention for the whole hour of teaching clearly manifested in the experiences of the students in a class which utilized pattern interrupt. At the last part of this presentation are the conclusions and recommendations that were drawn in the completion of this research. For the first conclusion, low mean score in pretest is normal. This shows that there must be something to do to increase the scores from applying the proposed intervention. In educational research, interventions can be strategies, methods, or innovations which may have very helpful in achieving quality education. Now, for the recommendation, teachers should recognize and emphasize more on planning and conceptualizing the path of the lesson that they are about to teach. Modifying teaching strategies and techniques can assure optimum effort in teaching passionately. For the second conclusion, pattern interrupt is comparable to the traditional way of teaching, as it means with or without pattern interrupts, the outcome will just be the same on the statistical point of analysis. However, the higher mean score reached by the experimental group could illustrate a positive effect on the students. So, it still can be recommended that pattern interrupts can be considered as one of the approaches that the teachers can use inside the classroom, especially as they aim to develop attention skills and establish discipline in class. Third conclusion, this research had limitation. This research used small sample size, which may not guarantee the same effect of the intervention to the population. As it seems, limitations of this research have been concluded, and a recommendation to conduct a longer period evaluation on the effectiveness of pattern interrupt in developing students' listening skills through an authoritative approach of discipline is imposed to ensure the efficiency of the said approach. A larger sample size and different treatments can be also done to this research to certify the reliability of the results. Fourth conclusion, in the three phases of the lesson, pattern interrupts had played a vital role in keeping students attentive during the class. So, this research recommends the Department of Education to provide more specialized trainings for teachers related to the effective approaches in teaching listening and attention skills. And for the last conclusion and recommendations in this research, nevertheless, pattern interrupts had given students a more exciting and engaging classroom setting. It added a new spice of teaching in an unconventional manner. Therefore, this research is still subjected to further studies. Constructive insights are welcomed to determine the appropriate method as to how this research be undertaken. And that is the end of my presentation. I will end this with in scripture from Psalm 1st, chapter 18, verse 24. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Thank you very much and God bless. Again, I am Veronica Manuel from MAEd-English. Thank you.